On April 25, 1990, three men were driving through Oklahoma City when they saw a blue high-heeled shoe lying in the middle of the road. As they continued driving, they saw a woman lying on the side of the road, face down, convulsing. They pulled into the nearby Motel 6 and told the desk agent to call 911. It was about 1 a.m. when the ambulance arrived and rushed the woman to Presbyterian Hospital. She had a number of bruises and a hematoma on her head. Surprisingly, she had no broken bones and she was listed in stable but serious condition. The woman had no ID on her and her name was unknown until a man named Clarence Hughes arrived at the hospital later that morning and informed the doctors that the woman they were treating was his wife, Tanya Hughes. After Tanya succumbed to her injuries, Clarence would disappear and authorities would learn that the couple were not the people they said they were. An extensive investigation would uncover their previous identities, but then they would learn that those still weren't who they were. Years of investigation would uncover multiple aliases, insurance fraud, multiple kidnappings, multiple murders, and a predator who spent more than 3 decades committing crimes across the United States. This is Monsters. The name Franklin Delano Floyd sounds almost deliberately presidential, an irony that is not lost on those who have studied this case. Named after the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin was born on June 17, 1943 in Barnesville, Georgia, a small town about an hour south of Atlanta. He was the youngest of 5 children born to Thomas and Della Floyd. Thomas was reported to be abusive to Della and the children, but he died of liver and kidney failure close to Franklin's first birthday. After 15 months living with Della's parents, they asked their daughter to move out and Della placed her children in foster care. The children were placed in the Georgia Baptist Children's Home in Hateville, a residential facility for children from difficult or broken homes. Franklin later claimed that he had been abused at that institution, though his truthfulness on virtually every subject is questionable. Once at the children's home, the siblings were separated and placed in groups of children their own age. They would do schoolwork in the mornings and spend the afternoons working in the fields to grow the food they ate for dinner. They were also only allowed to see their mother twice a year. Della wrote to the home often requesting additional visits, but she was usually denied. She was once told to, quote, leave her children alone. Though the children were fed and kept healthy physically, the conditions had a serious impact on Franklin's mental health. As Franklin got older, he got into more and more trouble at the children's home, which was punished severely. He was regularly whipped, and once he was caught masturbating, so he had his hand placed in a pot of hot water. One by one, the Floyd children aged out of the home and left. Franklin ran away when he was 16 and was eventually taken in by his sister Dorothy. He was only there for 2 weeks before he was kicked out and he went to Indianapolis in search of his mother. He found her there performing sex work, and after a few weeks he traveled to California where he enlisted in the United States Army. He only served 6 months before officials learned that he had lied on his application and was underage. They kicked him out and he ended up drifting around the country, making it all the way to New York before making his way back to the Golden State. There, in 1960, he tried to open a gun case at a Sears department store and set off an alarm. The police were called and a gunfight ensued. I'm not sure if he already had a gun on him or if he used a gun from the store. Either way, he was shot in the stomach and taken to the hospital. After recovering, he was placed in a youth detention facility until a few months after his 18th birthday. He was arrested for a parole violation in October for leaving the state on a camping trip. In May of 1962, Franklin moved back to Hateville, where the children's home was located. The following month, he kidnapped a 4-year-old girl from a bowling alley and took her into the woods where he sexually assaulted her. He was caught and convicted of child molestation, being sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He maintained his innocence despite his semen being found on the victim's genitals. He was sent to the Milledgeville State Hospital for psychiatric testing, and he managed to escape after having been there for 4 months. He stole a car, bought a pellet pistol, and used that to rob a bank. He walked away with $6,810.28, which would be almost $75,000 today, but he was quickly caught. He told the authorities that he only needed the money so he could pay for his defense against his child molestation charges. Oh, well, in that case. Needless to say, Franklin was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. At the federal prison in Chillicothe, Ohio, Franklin and 2 other inmates hotwired a prison fire truck and attempted to crash it through the fence, but were caught. He was charged with attempted escape and destruction of government property, and 5 years was added to his sentence to be served concurrently. Then he was transferred to a maximum security federal prison in Pennsylvania. This guy just turned 20 years old. We're just getting started. There was a documentary about this case on Netflix called The Girl in the Picture, which isn't bad, but it doesn't even scratch the surface of Franklin Floyd's life. The maximum security prison had more violent offenders, and once they learned that Franklin was a convicted pedophile, he became the target of regular sexual assaults and beatings. At one point during his stay in Pennsylvania, he made it to the roof of the prison and threatened to jump, but was talked down by a guard. In 1964, he was transferred to the Medical Center of Federal Prisoners in Missouri for another psychiatric evaluation. From there, he was sent to the new maximum security federal prison in Illinois, but he was not treated any better by the other inmates there. He managed to get by and spent years getting his GED and then studying the law. In February of 1968, Franklin was sent to a state prison in Georgia to simultaneously serve the rest of his bank robbery sentence and his sentence for child molestation. There he became friends with a convict named David Dial, and the two would spend their time playing chess and talking. It helped that David was a large man who scared the other inmates from abusing Franklin like at the other prisons. Franklin was paroled from his molestation conviction in 1971 and sent to another federal prison to finish his sentence for the escape attempt. He was released from there the following year, living in a halfway house from November of 1972 until January of 1973. Franklin wasn't even on his own for a month before he was caught committing another crime. On January 27th, he saw a woman at a gas station, walked up behind her and stuck his finger in her back. Pretending it was a gun, he ordered her into her car and told her to drive out of the gas station. While the woman was driving, he slapped her and started grabbing at her clothes, so she hit the brakes and jumped out of the car. She managed to get away from Franklin and he was arrested. By then, David Dial was out of prison and he bailed his old friend out of jail. Franklin was scheduled to appear in court on June 11th, but he never showed up. His friend was out $3,000 and Franklin was in the wind. He began using the name Brandon Williams and headed east. Sandra Brandenburg was down on her luck in North Carolina after going through 2 divorces and struggling to care for her children after a natural disaster. She had married Cliff Sevakis just out of high school, and she got pregnant before he was drafted into the United States Army and sent to war in Vietnam. Their daughter, Suzanne Sevakis, was born while he was away on September 6, 1969. By the time Cliff returned from the war, he was a different person, and Sandra had been seeing someone else, so they divorced. Sandra went on to marry Dennis Brandenburg and had another child, a daughter named Allison. Not long after, they had another daughter together, Amy, and at some point the couple split up. Sandra was already pregnant by the time that happened, though. She returned to Charlotte, North Carolina to be near her parents, but had trouble making money and turned to sex work and drugs. There are conflicting reports about the birth of Sandra's 4th child, Philip, in 1974. Some say she had the baby and left him at a church, and others say she gave him up for adoption at the hospital, but either way he was adopted right around his birth. Not long after that, a tornado hit the mobile home she lived in and completely tore her life apart. She went to the social services office for help only to have them take her 3 daughters from her. That was when Sandra met Brandon Williams, who had been working as a truck driver. One source says they met at a truck stop, but Sandra said in an interview that they met at church. She vented to him about her problems, and Brandon offered to help her get her children back. Within 2 weeks, the couple got married, and with a stable home to return to, social services returned Suzanne, Allison, and Amy to their mother. Over the next few years, they moved to Pennsylvania, then to Missouri, and then to Texas. It's common for criminals and con artists to move frequently because they're always chasing a new score while running from the consequences of their past crimes. It was in Dallas that Sandra was sent to jail, and when she was released, Brandon and her daughters were gone. Sandra claimed in an interview that she had written a bad check and was sent to jail for 30 days because of it, but according to her family, she doesn't seem to have a problem lying, like previously claiming she met Brandon at church, as opposed to the other story of meeting him at a truck stop offering sex. Sandra's family looked into the situation and believed that Sandra had been arrested on a solicitation charge. More conflicting stories come from Sandra claiming she reported her daughters missing, but the police told her that Brandon was their stepfather and was legally allowed to take them. Sandra's family would find out that she had never reported them missing. Allison and Amy were eventually discovered to have been dropped off at a church-operated children's home, but Brandon and Suzanne were gone. Suzanne Sevakis was 6 years old when she vanished with a man calling himself Brandon Williams, and both of their whereabouts are pretty much unknown until they resurfaced in Forest Park, Georgia in 1983. Sharon Marshall started attending Forest Park High School in November of 1983, and accounts of the area report Sharon as being 15, but since she was really Suzanne Sevakis, it would have actually made her 14. She was smart and was taking advanced classes, so it's possible Franklin had lied about her age. Sharon told the other students that she lived with her father, Warren Marshall, who was actually Brandon Williams, who was actually Franklin Floyd, and that her mother had died in a car accident. She was immediately one of the top students in her class and had a dream of attending Georgia Tech, studying aerospace engineering, hoping to one day work for NASA. During the summer break in 1984, Sharon went to a summer leadership workshop where she met a student from another high school named Jennifer Fisher. Despite not attending the same high school, the two quickly became best friends. When the event was over, they said their goodbyes, but when Jennifer asked Sharon for her phone number, Sharon responded that she couldn't give it out. Jennifer thought it was weird, but gave Sharon her own number instead and told her to call when she could. Jennifer was excited to have found a new friend, but after a week back home with no call from Sharon, she ended up finding a phone directory for all the students who had attended the workshop and decided to make the call. When Sharon answered, she did not sound happy. Soon Jennifer heard a man in the background yelling, quote, "Who's on the phone?" She could hear Sharon trying to tell him it was a friend from the workshop, but that she hadn't given her their phone number before the call cut off. Sharon called Jennifer back a few minutes later, saying that her father didn't understand how she had found their number, but she explained it and he had calmed down. After that, the girls spoke on the phone often, though Jennifer noticed that Sharon always had to go as soon as her father came home. After some time, Sharon was invited to stay with Jennifer, and the Fishers soon found out how strange Warren Marshall was. On Sharon's second stay at their home, after shaking hands with Jennifer's father, Joel, he asked to speak with him privately. Then he asked Joel, a man he barely knew, for a loan. Warren was a painting contractor, and he told Joel that he had a large job coming up, but he wasn't able to buy the supplies he needed. Joel turned him down, obviously, but from then on he was leery of the man. When Warren told Jennifer that she could come to their house to spend the night, the Fishers initially said no. They loved Sharon, but were unsure about her father. Eventually they gave in, and Jennifer had an evening that would change her life forever. Everything inside of the Marshall home was odd. They didn't have doors on their bedrooms, just curtains over the doorways. There was also a room that Sharon said not to go in. She said nobody was allowed in there. Sharon's room seemed normal beside the curtain for a door, but later that evening, after Warren had taken them to dinner and dropped them off at a bar to dance, Sharon opened a drawer in her dresser and Jennifer saw that it was loaded with lingerie. There were sexy nighties and even crotchless panties. When Jennifer asked where she got them, Sharon responded that her father bought them for her. Suddenly, while the girls were still changing, Warren barged into the room waving a gun around, yelling at the top of his lungs. After leaving the room, Sharon laughed it off and said that he was just being silly. Then Warren came back into the room with the gun, ordered Jennifer to lay down on the floor next to the bed, and then sexually assaulted Sharon in the bed. The next day, Sharon tried to comfort her friend by telling her she was okay and to let it go, but it haunted Jennifer for years. She kept it a secret for a long time, never accepting another offer to spend the night. In her final year of high school, Sharon was on the honor roll, took advanced placement math and science classes, was in the Air Force ROTC, the Future Business Leaders of America, and the Math and Computer Clubs. She got a good score on her SATs, and near the end of 1985, she applied at Georgia Tech. In March the following year, Jennifer got a phone call from an excited Sharon yelling that she got in. Georgia Tech had accepted her with a full scholarship. Still, her dream hinged on approval from her father. Warren had strict control of Sharon and relied on her to take care of everything around the house. Sharon was sure he would say no, but soon got another call so Sharon could tell her that her father had said yes. Questions arose when Warren put a full-page ad in the 1986 high school yearbook, congratulating Sharon on her acceptance to Georgia Tech. The problem was that it was accompanied by a professional picture of the girl that looked almost seductive. People wondered why a father would put that picture in the yearbook, but like so many others at the time, they shrugged it off. Then, not long before graduating, people started noticing a change in Sharon. She had gained some weight, but she explained it away, saying she had been eating too much junk food. When people asked if she was pregnant, she denied it. Of course, she was lying. She really was pregnant, claiming the father was a boy she had been dating, but I don't think that was ever confirmed. Warren would end up making Sharon turn down her scholarship to Georgia Tech and pulled her out of school before she could get her diploma. They went to Arizona, which Sharon told Jennifer was because the drier air would be better for her father. She eventually gave birth to a boy who they put up for adoption. In a letter to Jennifer, Sharon explained that the parents were both doctors from Texas, but nothing else is known about that child. A few weeks later, Sharon took a Greyhound bus to Georgia and stayed with the Fishers. Sharon asked them if she could stay with them permanently, but Jennifer's parents didn't think it was a good idea. They tried to help out by getting Sharon a plane ticket back to Arizona so she didn't have to take the bus. That was the last time they saw Sharon. Eventually, the supposed father-daughter duo moved to Tampa, Florida, where Warren found a new way to make money, by pimping out Sharon. Mons Venus is a pretty famous strip club in Tampa. I've never been myself, but that's what I've been told. Sharon easily got a job there as the management knew her youthful, innocent look would be a big hit. Sadly, they were right. Sharon performed well, but what was more noticeable was her father's behavior once she started working there. He would drop Sharon off for her shifts, and sometimes he would come in and watch her dance. Now, we all know that Sharon was not his actual daughter, but nobody else knew that at the time, and they were quite disturbed. Like many times throughout Sharon's short life, her personality made up for the creep factor of Warren. Everybody liked Sharon. She was smart, beautiful, and friendly. Eventually, Sharon became pregnant again and gave birth to her second child, a son named Michael, on March 21, 1988. It's been reported that customers liked when Sharon's pregnancy started showing, so she danced right up until she gave birth. After Michael was born, Sharon started going to parties at upscale hotels with a coworker from the strip club to perform sex work. They were always driven by Warren. One day, Warren pointed out Sharon's new boob job and mentioned that he was hoping to get her into the porn industry. One of the last times the coworker was with Sharon was during a private party with a man who said he was a lifelong friend of Warren's. He claimed that he had been having sex with Sharon for most of her life. When her coworker started encouraging her to take Michael and get away from Warren, Sharon finally admitted to them that he wasn't really her father. The other strippers didn't have time to try and save her before Sharon became pregnant again and Warren suddenly moved them away. Franklin chose new names for himself and Suzanne, with him becoming Clarence Hughes and Suzanne becoming Tonya Tadlock. They just started listing Michael with the last name Hughes. Then they got married in New Orleans, changing Tanya's last name to Hughes. As soon as Tanya gave birth to her third child, a daughter, the baby was immediately put up for adoption. They headed north to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Tanya continued making money by stripping. Passion's Gentleman Club was a step down from Mons Venus. Just like in Tampa, her coworkers found Clarence, supposedly her husband, to be abusive, and they encouraged Tanya to take her son and leave him. Despite Clarence never having been a police officer, not under any name he used, he pretended to have been one in order to join the Fraternal Order of Police in Tulsa, and he told Tanya that he could use those connections to track her down if she ever tried to leave him. Once he found her, he would kill both her and Michael. Still, in April of 1990, Tanya had been having a secret relationship with a man named Kevin Brown, and she decided to run away with him. It's unknown what happened after that, but on April 25th, Tanya was found lying on a service road off I-35 in Oklahoma City. Police arrived on the scene after the victim had been taken away. Scattered in the road was a loaf of bread, 2 containers of milk, a package of cookies, and 2 bottles of Dr. Pepper soda. There was also a portable radio and a pair of headphones near where the body had been found. Investigators also found a broken-off car antenna, a windshield wiper, and some flecks of red paint, believed to have all come from the vehicle that hit her. There were also skid marks in the road before and after the presumed point of impact. A clerk at the nearby truck stop told investigators that the woman had come in that morning and purchased the groceries at about 12:30 a.m. The scene looked like the woman was walking back home with headphones on and hadn't heard a car coming. Of course, it was likely that the scene was intentionally made to look that way. At Presbyterian Hospital, the victim was not entirely conscious, but she was calling out for Daddy. Her arms and legs were spasming until doctors gave her medication to relax her muscles. Once they were done with their examination, finding just the bruises and hematoma, she went into a coma. Clarence claimed that he, his wife, and his 2-year-old son were staying at a nearby Motel 6 because Tanya had a gynecologist appointment in Oklahoma City. Investigators were never able to confirm that appointment. Clarence said that Tanya went out to buy some groceries and he fell asleep in the motel room. When he woke up and realized Tanya wasn't there, he went to the truck stop where he learned about the accident earlier that morning. Then he contacted the police, who came and talked to him at the motel. Clarence told the officers that Tanya was a stripper and that she liked to meet men, so he was used to her being out most of the night. The police did inspect Clarence's car and noted that it was blue with no damage. At the hospital, after giving the doctor Tanya's details, he asked the nurse for a pen and paper and then asked to be alone with his wife. When the nurse came back later, Clarence was gone and there was a note on the door that said, "Do not disturb." Clarence called Passion's Gentlemen's Club and told Tanya's coworkers that she was in the hospital. Now, that wasn't because he wanted them to visit. He actually told a coworker named Connie that the hospital wouldn't allow her to visit, which was a lie. What Clarence wanted was whatever money Tanya was due from the club. Connie ignored Clarence's warning not to come visit, and she enlisted Kevin Brown to drive her to Oklahoma City. When they got there, the hospital staff had no problem directing them to Tanya's room. Despite the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, Connie entered first and sat by her friend. When a nurse came in to take Tanya's vitals, she noticed that her head was moving when she heard Connie's voice. The nurse called the doctor, and they were very hopeful that the patient was slowly coming out of her coma. Doctors also discussed with Connie and Kevin their doubts that Tanya's injuries came from being struck by a car. They didn't quite match, and she surely didn't have injuries that suggested she had gone up over the hood, breaking off the antenna, then onto the windshield, breaking off a windshield wiper. When Connie told them that her husband was abusive, they encouraged her to go to the police. Tanya's condition continued to improve over the next few days, and Connie and Kevin returned to Tulsa. The next day, Connie was called by the hospital and informed that her friend's condition had taken a turn for the worse and they didn't believe she would make it through the day. By the time Connie made it back to the hospital, Tanya was dead. Connie learned that Clarence had visited the night before, and then that morning Tanya's condition had worsened. When Clarence was called about Tanya's condition, he said he wouldn't be returning and instructed the hospital to donate her organs and then cremate her body. Clarence Hughes abandoned his wife at the hospital and had no plans for a memorial. Connie got permission from Clarence to have the body transported to Tulsa, and the owner of Passions paid for a memorial. It didn't take a detective to know that Clarence had clearly done something to cause Tanya's death, but the authorities wouldn't take Connie's claims seriously. Around the time of Tanya's death, Clarence called the Department of Social Services and surrendered 2-year-old Michael. His intention was for the boy to stay in a foster home for a week while he attended Tanya's funeral and got things situated. Part of that was to collect on 2 life insurance policies totaling $80,000 that he had taken out on Tanya shortly before her death. When Clarence tried to collect the insurance money, the insurance company needed his social security number in order to process the payment. Clarence gave them 2 fake social security numbers which wouldn't work in the system, so he finally gave in and gave them his real social security number. That number was accepted by the system and Clarence received the payment, but it eventually spit out the name Franklin Floyd, which was flagged as a federal fugitive. The insurance company alerted the U.S. Marshals, who contacted the local police, and they finally began investigating Tanya's death as a homicide committed by Clarence. By the time U.S. Marshals arrived at his apartment, though, he was gone. Connie and the club owner tried to track down Tanya's family, and by using her maiden name, they were able to find her mother. When they called the woman and gave her the bad news, the woman scoffed and asked if it was a prank. She informed them that her daughter had died 20 years prior as an infant. It turned out that Clarence and Tanya had gotten their names from headstones at a cemetery. Michael remained with the foster family who had initially taken him in for a week. Ernest and Merle Bean had 4 kids of their own and had been fostering children for 6 years, having already fostered 60 children. They said that Michael was by far the most difficult foster they had ever had. When he first arrived at their home, he laid on the floor, screaming and banging his head so hard they feared he would injure himself. He was not potty trained, could barely walk, and didn't talk. He also didn't drink milk. When he arrived, they found his bottle filled with half water, half Pepsi. After switching him to milk and providing him with regular meals, Michael adapted quickly to his new environment. It took a year before he finally spoke, but his behavior continued to improve, and eventually, the Beans were positive that he would be able to grow into a happy and healthy child. 6 months after disappearing, authorities received a tip that Franklin Floyd was living in Augusta, Georgia. Franklin was going to have to serve time for jumping bond 17 years prior, and he contacted social services in Oklahoma and told them he was planning to do his time and turn his life around. But then he would want to regain custody of Michael. Then he contacted a lawyer to represent him with custody issues. By then, the Beans had asked about formally adopting the boy. While Franklin was in prison, he was able to convince social services that Michael should return to him after his release. When Franklin was transferred to a prison in Oklahoma, he was granted visitation of the boy, and the progress was increasingly in his favor. That was until the courts ordered a paternity test, which showed that Franklin was not Michael's father. Social services immediately asked the court to terminate Franklin's parental rights so they could move forward with his adoption to the Beans. Michael was set to remain with the Beans permanently, where he was doing well, having been enrolled in a special needs class at Choctaw Elementary. Franklin was released from prison on March 20th, 1993, after spending almost 3 years locked up. He was in the process of fighting the court's ruling about his rights to Michael and lived in a halfway house in Oklahoma City. During counseling sessions there, he claimed that members of organized crime had killed his wife, Tanya, for some reason. The rest of the time, he ranted about the situation with Michael. At one point, the court reversed their previous decision, and Franklin was able to get close to convincing the authorities that he should get Michael back. But then Franklin couldn't help but be Franklin. On July 4th, 1994, Franklin was caught in an apartment and attacked the woman who lived there. He had gotten a job doing maintenance for an apartment complex and used his master key to go into a woman's apartment and rummage through her underwear drawer. When the woman arrived home, he attacked her with a knife, cutting her arm in the process. When her boyfriend showed up, Franklin fled, but the boyfriend caught up and held him until police arrived. At that point, Franklin's parole officer recommended that he be held without bail, but the courts released him anyway. In response to his arrest, Franklin was scheduled for a custody hearing September 23rd to come to a final decision about his custody of Michael. Franklin knew it wouldn't go his way. By September of 1994, Michael was 6 years old and was in first grade at Indian Meridian Elementary School. He was doing well with the beans and his speech was noticeably better. In early September, Merle thought she saw Franklin drive by their house, and then a few days later, Ernest found a makeshift campsite in the woods behind their property. They notified social services that they thought Franklin was going to try to take the boy, but no action was taken. On September 12th, Franklin entered the elementary school at about 9 a.m. and approached the principal. He pulled out a gun and told him he needed to get his son. At gunpoint, the principal led Franklin to Michael's classroom where he called the boy to come out. Then they went to the principal's white Ford pickup truck and Franklin had the man drive them away from the school. They stopped in a field and Franklin handcuffed the principal to a tree and left in his vehicle. The principal was discovered 2 hours later. Michael was never seen again. Despite a wave of activity by local authorities and FBI, Franklin was able to get away. In October of 1994, in Dallas, Texas, employees at a Wonder Bread factory alerted police that a white Ford pickup truck had been sitting in their employee parking lot for several weeks. When the officer ran the plates, it came back the vehicle that had been stolen by Franklin Floyd during the kidnapping of Michael. In November, federal agents learned that Franklin was living in Louisville, Kentucky, working as a used car salesman. Franklin had ordered a replacement driver's license from Florida for whatever identity he was using at the time. So an FBI agent dressed up as a Federal Express delivery driver and approached him at the used car lot. As soon as Franklin came out of the building to greet the delivery man, 7 agents surrounded him with their guns drawn. Franklin initially denied being, well, Franklin, but after the lead agent told him they were going to verify his prints, he gave in. He did not have Michael with him, though, and when asked where the boy was, he simply said, quote, "He's not here, but he's fine." That was all he would tell the agents. In his possession, they found 3 pictures. One of Sharon in her teens, one of Michael as an infant, and the third was of an unidentified adult woman. They also found the current address for the 4-year-old girl Franklin had sexually assaulted in 1962. When the agent asked him why he had it, he wouldn't answer. Being the lifelong con artist he was, Franklin gave the investigators more incorrect information about who Sharon was and where they had been in the years before her death. When they asked him about the events of September 12, 1994, he claimed he was being chased by the mafia. He said that he had left his car near the school, but he didn't go inside. A member of the mafia went inside and kidnapped Michael. Franklin is basically a horrible waste of human life who takes whatever he wants and won't take responsibility for his actions. He'd just spew some unbelievable lie and then rant about how much of a victim he is. It was pathetic. While preparing for Franklin's federal trial, investigators pieced together more information about where he and the woman named Tanya had been. One of the people who came forward with information was Jennifer Fisher. That showed that Tanya Hughes was actually Sharon Marshall, but the fact that that particular identity vanished prior to her teens showed that it wasn't her real identity. They had found a picture with a young Franklin with a 5- or 6-year-old version of Sharon sitting on his lap. so there must have been a different identity prior to her being Sharon, but they couldn't find it. They also learned that in Arizona, Sharon began working as a hostess at a Marriott hotel restaurant in Phoenix. It was there that she had met a man named Greg Higgs, and the two started dating. They dated for a few months before Sharon disappeared, eventually writing him a letter saying she and her father had moved to Texas. 8 months later, she returned to Phoenix and got her old job back, so one day he showed up to work and she was just there, like she'd never left. They picked up their relationship, but in the fall of 1987, she disappeared again. He never heard from her again and didn't know she was pregnant, but in March of 1988, Sharon gave birth to Greg's son in Tampa, Florida. It seemed that Franklin had considered giving Michael to Greg after Sharon, or Tanya, had died. He called Greg and told him about the death and informed him that Michael was his son. He asked him if he would take Michael, and Greg didn't hesitate to say yes. Franklin told Greg that he would contact him in a few days to make arrangements, but never did. Greg never saw his son. Franklin was charged with 7 federal charges, including kidnapping and carjacking, both with firearms, severely increasing the possible sentences. Investigators believed he had killed Michael, but they had no body. The best they could do was put him in prison for life for the other charges. His trial started on March 29, 1995, and there was more than enough evidence to put him away. It would have been an unremarkable trial if it weren't for the fact that Franklin ended up representing himself. That meant he got to cross-examine the witnesses, including Jennifer Fisher, who he tried to suggest only disliked him because of the lies she had been told by the FBI. Jennifer corrected him that she disliked him because he was a pedophile rapist. Other witnesses, he just asked irrelevant, nonsensical questions that didn't really have an answer. Of course, Franklin Floyd was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 52 years and 3 months in prison with no parole. At his age, it was essentially a life sentence. During the trial, some additional evidence was found in the Ford truck that had belonged to the principal of Michael's school. After it was stolen, the insurance company wrote it off as a loss and then resold it. The new owner took it to a shop to have a trailer hitch installed, and the mechanic found an envelope tucked between the truck bed and the fuel tank. When he peeked into the envelope, he saw dozens of photos that were clearly criminal, so he turned them over to the police. They eventually made it into the hands of the FBI, who reviewed 97 photos. Most of them were of young girls, some of whom were nude or engaged in sexual activity. Some of them were identified to be Sharon from the time she was a toddler until she was a teen. Then there were a number of photos of a woman who looked to be in her early 20s. The woman was nude with her hands tied behind her back and a blindfold over her eyes. She had been severely beaten in the pictures and had swollen lips and blood on her face. One agent would later say in an interview that he didn't believe the woman could have been beaten that badly and survive. Investigators sent an inquiry to the authorities in areas that Franklin had frequented, asking if there were any unsolved homicides or missing persons matching the description. It didn't take long for them to get a response. Cheryl Comessa was a 19-year-old dancer at the Mons Venus in Tampa, Florida. She worked with Sharon and the two had become friends. Franklin, living as Warren, won her affection by claiming he had connections in the entertainment industry, which he didn't. He also took nude photographs of her, claiming he could get her into Playboy. Warren was living off of a scam disability claim while also working on multiple insurance frauds. He had stolen a boat, gotten an insurance policy on it, then drilled holes in it and sunk it in Tampa Bay. Before he did that, though, he brought Cheryl out on the boat and attempted to have sex with her. When she turned him down, he punched her and started strangling her. She managed to get away and jumped into the water, swimming a quarter mile or 400 meters back to the shore. In an act of revenge, Cheryl reported Sharon for claiming she made less than she really did. Making so much extra money in cash made it easy to underreport your earnings to lower your tax burden. A few days later, Warren tried to kidnap Cheryl from the parking lot of Mons Venus, but she got away again. The following week, Cheryl stopped showing up to work and was never seen again. It wasn't long before Sharon found out she was pregnant again, and the Marshalls planned to flee the area. Warren had sunk the ship by then, but he was not finished with his insurance fraud efforts. On June 16, 1989, a few weeks after they had moved out, the mobile home they lived in burst into flames. The fire investigator determined that a combustible material had been left on the stove, which was left on. The fire was determined to have been arson. On March 29, 1995, a laborer was working on the side of I-275 in St. Petersburg, Florida, when he stumbled across some bones that looked human. He managed to flag down a Florida state trooper and showed him the discovery. After the scene had been thoroughly examined, they had collected most of the skeleton of a young woman, but they had no way of identifying the remains. The skull showed fractures to the face along with 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head. It was clearly a homicide. When the FBI started looking for a connection to the woman in the photos, they assumed she had been someone the Marshalls knew in Florida. They eventually talked to people at the Mons Venus strip club and learned that Cheryl Camesso had disappeared after a conflict with Warren Marshall. When the police in St. Petersburg suggested their Jane Doe could be Cheryl, they requested her dental records for comparison, and they turned out to be a match. Cheryl Camesso had been located, and it was very likely that she had been killed by Franklin Floyd. When authorities interviewed Franklin about the murder, he immediately went on an almost hour-long rant. The investigators just let him wear himself out. When they finally started asking about Cheryl, Franklin claimed she was killed in 1994 and he wasn't in Florida at the time. When the investigators corrected him, saying her remains were found in 1995 but they believed she was murdered in 1989, Franklin just threw his hands up and admitted he was in Florida in '89. When he was shown a photo of the victim, he claimed she may have been friends with Sharon, but he wasn't sure. Then, like every other time the authorities talked to the lifetime con artist, he rambled on about how Sharon had stolen money from some bad people and they had to leave the area. Sure. Franklin was charged in Florida with the first-degree murder of Cheryl Camesso. He maintained his innocence, claiming that the pictures of her were not his and that the FBI was just claiming they were. Of course, poor Franklin was being railroaded again. Except that investigators were able to match the carpet and furniture in the photos to the same carpet and furniture that the Marshalls had in their trailer home in 1989. It wasn't until 2001 that Franklin was transported to Florida to stand trial, though. His lawyers claimed that he was not competent to stand trial, so he was sent for psychiatric evaluations. Franklin was actually appalled at the idea that he would be labeled crazy. He fought against it, but 2 psychiatrists deemed him incompetent to stand trial. The judge, however, disagreed, and she ordered his trial to proceed. After a 9-day trial where Franklin continually had outbursts directed at the judge, sometimes being removed from the courtroom, Franklin Floyd was found guilty and sentenced to death. There was no doubt that Franklin would die in prison, but there were still questions. Authorities still didn't know the true identity of the woman who lived as Sharon Marshall and Tanya Hughes, and they didn't know what had happened to Michael. After writing a book about the case called A Beautiful Child, Matt Birkbeck took to the internet to try and answer those questions. In 2005, he received an email from a woman who believed she had adopted Sharon's 3rd child in 1989. The woman had adopted a baby from Clarence and Tanya Hughes and paid them a fee of $10,000, which was allowed in the legal adoption process. The now teenage girl was named Megan, and they were willing to give a DNA sample so they could use it in their search for the birth mother's true identity. It was first compared to a blood sample that had been taken from Tanya while she was in the hospital and confirmed that Megan was in fact her daughter. That would still be an exhaustive search through decades of information and ultimately wouldn't provide any results. It wasn't until 2014 when Franklin agreed to be interviewed by investigators while on death row at Union Correctional in Florida that they finally learned her true identity. The first thing he did when he entered the room was claim he didn't kill Cheryl Camesso. He never stopped playing games. Before the investigators could get any usable information, they had to sit through Franklin ranting about how he was set up and how he had such a strong case for appeal and blah blah blah. The investigator let him vent, and then he got right to the subject at hand. Who was Sharon Marshall and what happened to Michael? Franklin continued to try to take them off in various tangents, but the agent always brought them back to those two questions. Who was Sharon Marshall and what happened to Michael? Franklin told them about his youth and bragged about his criminal exploits. Who was Sharon Marshall and what happened to Michael? He talked about various jobs he had and how good he was at them. Who was Sharon Marshall and what happened to Michael? Finally, he started telling the investigators about being a truck driver and meeting a woman named Sandra Brandenburg, who had 3 children. The oldest was named Suzanne Sevakis, and she was Sharon Marshall. He claimed that he wanted to get the girls away from their mother because she was getting into trouble, so he dropped the younger girls at a children's home, but he claimed Suzanne wanted to go with him. He told them proudly that he had saved her. Before they could get more information, their interview time was up, but when they checked his story, it added up. They found the marriage certificate for Brandon Williams and Sandra Brandenburg. They also found a birth certificate for Suzanne Sevakis from 1969. Then they tracked down Sandra, who confirmed the story. Though Franklin would never admit to killing Suzanne, months later he finally told the investigators that Michael was dead. He first claimed he had strangled the boy and threw his body in a dumpster, but after more pushing from the agents, he finally told a story that was believable. He told the investigators that, while they were driving, Michael wouldn't stop screaming that he wanted to go back. He said he found a secluded spot and shot Michael twice in the back of the head to make it real quick. It matched how Cheryl Camesso had been killed, which added validity to the story. Franklin told the investigators where the murder had happened, but even after an extensive search, no remains were ever found. In 2019, a man named Stephen Patterson contacted the author Matt Birkbeck, believing he was Philip, the child that Sandra Brandenburg had put up for adoption. The following year, a DNA test confirmed that he was the biological son of Sandra. As far as I could find, the first child that Suzanne gave up for adoption has never been located. On January 23, 2023, Franklin Delano Floyd died of natural causes at the age of 79 while incarcerated on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. He spent his entire life as a criminal and a con artist and went to his grave as a pedophile, rapist, murderer, and a monster. If you want to learn more about this case, you can read A Beautiful Child and Finding Sharon, both by Matt Birkbeck. They're available wherever you purchase books. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.